The small cafe sat at the corner of a busy street, with large windows that let the sunlight spill over the wooden tables. Inside, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the soft scent of pastries, and the low hum of quiet chatter filled the air. The cafe was always lively, a favorite spot for people looking for a place to relax or meet friends. Some came for the food, some for the coffee, but most came for the cozy atmosphere that made it feel like a second home. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and yet, in a room full of familiar faces, some people still felt invisible. The waitress moved through the tables with quiet efficiency, her apron tied neatly around her waist and her hair pulled back so it would not fall into her face. She had been working at the cafe for a few years, and though she had seen hundreds of customers come and go, she remained polite and professional with every single one. Her smile was warm, but not flashy, and she had a way of moving that was unobtrusive, making it easy for people to forget she was even there. Some customers didn't notice her at all unless they needed something, while others smiled politely and then returned to their conversations. She had learned not to mind. In fact, she was used to it. It was just the way the world worked, she thought. People were busy with their own lives and often didn't see the people who quietly kept things running. Most days passed in a routine of taking orders, bringing drinks, and cleaning up tables. She had her favorite corners of the cafe, the ones where the sunlight hit just right or where the chairs were especially comfortable. Sometimes she would pause for a moment, leaning against the counter, and watch the regulars chat. She knew their stories better than they knew each other. The elderly man who came every morning for a black coffee and a slice of pie, the young couple who always shared a croissant and whispered secrets to each other, the group of students who laughed too loudly over their textbooks. They all had their places in her mental map of the cafe. She smiled quietly to herself as she observed them, finding comfort in their routines. Despite her familiarity with the cafe and its people, not everyone treated her kindly. Some customers laughed when she made small mistakes, like spilling a drop of coffee or misplacing a napkin. She remembered one morning when a group of people at a large table whispered and snickered as she refilled their drinks. They didn't say anything to her face, but their laughter cut through her composure, making her cheeks burn. She kept her smile on, but inside, a mix of embarrassment and frustration stirred. It was not the first time this had happened, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. Still, she refused to let it affect her work. She had a pride in doing her job well, no matter what others thought. What most people didn't know was that she had a secret. When the cafe was quiet, she sometimes sat at the piano tucked into the corner. It wasn't a fancy instrument, but it was well-maintained and sounded beautiful when played properly. She had loved music since she was a child, spending hours at home practicing songs that no one ever heard. Music had always been her escape, a place where she could express herself without fear of judgment. At the piano, she was no longer just a waitress moving quietly through the cafe. She was someone who could create beauty, someone who could touch hearts without speaking a single word. She had never performed in front of anyone except a few family members when she was younger, and even then, she had been too shy to let anyone see her true skill. Over the years, her talent had grown, but so had her caution. She knew what people were like. They could be kind and appreciative, but they could also be cruel and dismissive. It was easier to keep her music to herself, to play in secret, than to risk humiliation. Still, every now and then, when the cafe was empty and the sunlight streamed across the floor, she would sit at the piano and let her fingers dance across the keys. The sound was soft at first, then stronger, rising and falling like waves. She closed her eyes and let the music fill the room, imagining that someone was there, listening, understanding. On one particular morning, the cafe was busier than usual. The chatter of customers blended with the clinking of cups and the hiss of the espresso machine. She moved quickly, taking orders and bringing drinks, her mind half focused on her tasks and half on the piano in the corner. A group of young people came in, loud and full of energy, their laughter cutting through the normal rhythm of the cafe. They made jokes and teased each other, but some of their teasing spilled over toward her. She felt their eyes glance her way, and she caught snatches of their whispered laughter. They weren't mean exactly, but they weren't kind either. It was the kind of attention that made her want to shrink, to become invisible. She reminded herself to stay calm. She had done this many times before. A polite nod, a soft smile, and she continued with her work. But as the morning wore on, a small, persistent thought began to grow in her mind. The piano was there. The music was there. And she knew, deep down, that maybe it was time to let the music speak for her. She didn't say anything aloud, didn't make a plan. The thought hovered in the back of her mind, simple and quiet, like a small flame that refused to go out. As the lunch rush approached, the cafe grew louder. The young group continued to joke, and their laughter often centered on her. They made small comments, pretending to be playful, but she could feel the sting behind them. She could ignore it, as she always did, but something inside her shifted. Instead of stepping back and letting the world see her as just a waitress, she felt a spark of determination. She wanted to show them, to show everyone, that she was more than what they assumed. She glanced at the piano again, then back at the bustling room. Her heart raced, not with fear this time, but with anticipation. She imagined sitting down and letting the music flow, letting it fill the cafe and capture the attention of those who had doubted her. It was a dangerous thought, risky in the sense that anyone could laugh or criticize, but it also felt liberating. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility that the laughter could change, that she could transform the energy in the room. As she moved between tables, taking orders and clearing crumbs, she rehearsed in her mind what it would feel like to sit at the piano. She imagined her fingers moving over the keys, the sound rising and filling the air. She pictured the faces of the customers, the ones who had laughed, and how they might react if they heard her play. A small, confident smile appeared on her face, the kind that came from a quiet certainty. She didn't know exactly when it would happen, but she felt that the moment was getting closer. By the time the early afternoon sun poured through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor, she had made her decision. She would play. She didn't know exactly how or what would happen, but she knew she could not hold back any longer. The laughter, the teasing, the subtle dismissals. They would all have to meet something real, something powerful that could not be ignored. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen, if only by herself, and that small flame of courage grew brighter. As she wiped down the counter, she allowed herself a deep breath. The cafe buzzed around her, the conversations blending into a steady hum. She glanced at the piano one more time, her hand brushing the smooth surface, and for a moment, everything else faded. It was just her and the music and the thought that perhaps, just perhaps, she could change the way people saw her. She did not know how they would react. She did not know if they would laugh or applaud or simply return to their chatter. But she knew that she could no longer hide behind the apron, behind the quiet movements, behind the polite smile. Something inside her demanded to be heard. And so, the first part of her story ended not with a grand gesture or a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, determined decision. She would play. She would take her place at the piano, and she would let the music speak for her. The cafe, the customers, the laughter. They were all part of the world she navigated every day, and now, for the first time, she would face them on her own terms. The small flame of courage flickered and grew, and the air around her seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what was to come. The afternoon moved slowly, the sunlight changing angle as the day went on, casting warm gold and soft shadows across the cafe. The waitress finished clearing a table and took a moment to glance at the piano. The thought she had nurtured all morning had not left her. It had grown stronger, like a tiny plant reaching for sunlight. She could almost hear the music in her mind. A song she had played countless times when the cafe was empty. A melody that carried her emotions without needing words. She imagined her fingers on the keys, the notes floating into the air, and the faces of the customers shifting from doubt to surprise, from laughter to admiration. It was terrifying to think about, but also thrilling. A coworker approached her, wiping her hands on a cloth, a friendly smile on her face. She noticed the quiet tension in the waitress's eyes and asked softly, "Are you thinking about playing?" The waitress nodded slightly, unsure if she would find the courage. I think I might," she admitted, her voice low. I don't know if anyone will care, or if they'll even listen. Her coworker smiled knowingly. You never know until you try. You've practiced for years, haven't you? People might laugh at first, but your music is something real. It deserves to be heard. Those words lingered in her mind as she moved to refill a coffee cup. She felt a mix of nerves and excitement, the kind that made her stomach twist and her heart beat faster. She knew this was a turning point. She could stay invisible forever, moving quietly through the cafe, or she could take a risk and show the world a piece of herself that no one had seen before. The thought was both exhilarating and frightening. The cafe continued to fill with customers, and the group of young people who had been teasing her earlier were still there, laughing and joking loudly. They had no idea what was about to happen. The waitress took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the smooth surface of the piano. She could hear the faint hum of conversation around her, the clinking of cups, the soft rustle of newspapers. It all felt distant, like background noise, as her mind focused on the music. She imagined herself seated at the piano, her hands moving over the keys, the first few notes filling the room. In her mind, the laughter would fade, replaced by surprise and attention. She didn't expect perfection, but she hoped for acknowledgement, for a moment where the world around her would pause and simply listen. That hope, fragile as it was, gave her the courage to move forward. When the cafe owner, who often stopped by to check on things, walked past her, she felt a pang of nervousness. What if he didn't allow it? What if he thought it was unprofessional? She opened her mouth to ask, but then realized she didn't need permission. The piano was there for anyone willing to play. She could step up and do it, and nothing could stop her except her own fear. She moved through the cafe, finishing her last rounds before she took her place. The customers were chatting, some glancing in her direction, probably curious about her movements. She held her head high, even though her heart was pounding. There was a small thrill in knowing that soon, everything would change, even if only for a few minutes. The piano would speak for her, and she would let it. As she approached the piano, the young group of customers noticed her. Some laughed softly, a mix of amusement and disbelief. She's going to play? One of them whispered to the others, trying to hide a smirk. The waitress didn't react. She set her hands on the keys, feeling the cool wood beneath her fingers, and closed her eyes for a brief moment. She drew in a deep breath, centering herself, letting the nerves settle into a focused determination. Her first note was quiet, tentative, almost shy. It seemed to float in the air, delicate and soft. The chatter in the cafe began to fade as people noticed the sound. She continued, each note more confident than the last, her fingers moving smoothly across the keys. The melody rose and fell, expressing feelings she had kept hidden for years. There was a beauty to it, a sense of longing and joy intertwined, and those who were listening began to stop their conversations, drawn in by the unexpected music. The young group, who had laughed at her moments before, paused mid-conversation. Their eyes widened in surprise as they realized the talent in front of them. The sound was nothing like they had expected. It was powerful and emotive, filling the room with a presence they could not ignore. The laughter that had followed her all morning faded completely, replaced by astonished silence. Some leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the notes that seemed to tell a story without words. The waitress continued playing, her confidence growing with each chord. The music carried her, guiding her through the performance, and for a few minutes, she was no longer just a waitress. She was an artist, a storyteller, a person who had something meaningful to share. Her fingers danced over the keys with grace and precision, the melody swelling and receding like waves on a calm sea. Every note seemed to reach into the hearts of the listeners, touching emotions they hadn't expected to feel. She noticed a few regulars smiling at her from their usual tables. The elderly man who came for his morning coffee looked genuinely moved, tapping his fingers lightly on the table as if keeping rhythm with the song. The young couple who had whispered to each other earlier now sat quietly, mesmerized by the performance. The group of students who had been so loud and teasing before were now completely focused, their previous amusement replaced by admiration. She could see the change in their expressions, the shift from doubt to respect. Time seemed to blur as she played, the outside world falling away. She was fully present, immersed in the music, letting it express what words never could. The sound carried a piece of her soul, her fears, her hopes, her years of quiet practice and hidden talent. The cafe was no longer just a place to serve coffee. It had become a stage, a space where she could finally be seen and heard. As the final notes lingered in the air, the room was silent for a brief moment. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the cafe. One by one, customers clapped, some standing up, others wiping away tears they hadn't expected to shed. The young group who had laughed at her now stared in awe, their previous teasing replaced by genuine admiration. The waitress sat for a moment, letting the sound of the clapping wash over her, a sense of pride and relief filling her chest. The cafe owner came over, a broad smile on his face. "That was incredible," he said, his voice full of genuine surprise and appreciation. "I didn't know you could play like that. You've got real talent." She smiled, a little shyly, but her eyes sparkled with the joy of being recognized. "Thank you," she said softly, still catching her breath. "I've played for a long time, just never in front of anyone." Her coworker, who had encouraged her earlier, gave her a gentle nod, pride shining in her expression. "I knew you could do it," she whispered. "They just had to see it for themselves." The applause continued as more customers joined in, some returning to their conversations, but now speaking with a new respect for the waitress they had often overlooked. She felt a warmth spread through her, a mix of relief and excitement. She had taken the risk and it had paid off. The music had spoken, and the world had listened. By the time the cafe settled back into its usual rhythm, the waitress felt different. She had faced her fears, and in doing so had changed how people saw her. She wasn't just the quiet person who moved through the cafe unnoticed anymore. She was someone with talent, courage, and a story to share. And while the day would continue with orders, drinks, and customers, she carried a newfound confidence, a spark of joy that could not be dimmed. The piano remained in the corner, waiting for the next moment when she would sit and let her music flow again. A reminder that sometimes, taking a chance could change everything. The moment she sat at the piano, the cafe seemed to change. The chatter dimmed as if the room itself was holding its breath. She placed her fingers lightly on the keys, feeling the familiar coolness under her fingertips, and let her thoughts quiet. There was still a trace of nerves, but it was mixed with something new, a strong, determined courage. She had already felt the spark of possibility that morning, and now it burned brighter, urging her forward. Her first notes were tentative, soft, and careful. The young group of customers who had laughed before exchanged glances, their amusement fading as they realized this was no ordinary performance. The melody slowly grew, gaining confidence with every note. Each sound seemed to fill not just the cafe, but the hearts of everyone present. She was telling a story without words, letting the music carry her emotions, her experiences, and her quiet strength. The subtle harmonies moved through the room like a gentle wave, drawing the listeners closer, inviting them into a world they had never noticed before. At first, there were a few stifled whispers, surprised expressions, and hesitant glances toward the piano. She didn't let it shake her. She focused on the music, letting her fingers move naturally across the keys. Each note was a statement, a quiet declaration that she existed, that her life and her talents mattered. She had spent years hidden behind the apron and the polite smile, but now, in this moment, she was visible and undeniable. Her past fears began to dissolve with each chord, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. The regulars were the first to react. The elderly man who always sat in the corner paused mid-sip of his coffee, leaning forward with a soft smile. He had seen her move quietly among the tables countless times, and now he was seeing a different side of her, one filled with grace and skill. The young couple, who had whispered to each other just moments ago, now sat in complete silence, captivated by the flow of the music. Even the students who had been teasing her earlier had stopped talking. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by eyes wide with surprise and admiration. The melody built gradually, its notes rising and falling like waves. She could feel the energy of the room shifting, the air charged with attention. People leaned in closer to hear better, to catch every subtle nuance of the music. It was as if the piano had created a bridge between her and the audience, connecting them through something universal and powerful. She realized that for the first time, she wasn't performing for herself alone. She was sharing something that could touch others, something that could make them feel, even if just for a few moments. Her fingers moved faster now, carrying the rhythm with a natural ease that came from years of practice. The melody was no longer cautious. It was bold and expressive. The notes told a story of struggle and perseverance, of quiet observation and hidden talent. The laughter and teasing that had greeted her earlier seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a growing sense of respect and wonder. She felt her confidence swell, and with it, her joy. This was what it felt like to be fully alive, to let her passion shine freely. As the music flowed, some customers closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others sat up straighter, their faces reflecting surprise and awe. The cafe owner, who had initially been skeptical, now watched with genuine admiration. It was a performance that no one had expected, and yet it felt completely natural, effortless, and deeply moving. The music seemed to reach into the hearts of everyone present, stirring emotions that words alone could never express. Even the group who had been laughing at her seemed changed. Their expressions softened, their previous amusement replaced by curiosity and respect. One of them, who had been whispering jokes just moments ago, now leaned forward, listening intently, completely absorbed. It was a transformation that she had hoped for but didn't dare to imagine fully. The laughter, the doubts, the teasing, all of it had been silenced by the simple power of music. She paused for a brief moment, letting the notes linger, savoring the stillness that followed. Then she continued, adding gentle flourishes, subtle dynamics, and expressive chords. Each movement of her hands told another part of the story, building tension and release, excitement and calm. She could feel the connection with the audience growing stronger, as if the cafe itself had become a living part of the performance. She realized that this was not just about impressing anyone. It was about sharing a piece of herself that had been hidden for too long. The melody reached its climax, powerful yet delicate, capturing the full range of her emotion. The audience was completely absorbed, some holding their breath, others swaying slightly with the rhythm. The young group, who had been so confident and teasing earlier, now seemed unsure how to process what they were witnessing. Their smirks had vanished, replaced by awe and genuine appreciation. It was a transformation that was both subtle and profound, and she felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that she had prompted it as the final notes echoed. Fading softly into the air, the room stayed silent for a moment longer, as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then, slowly, applause began. It started as a few hesitant claps, then grew into a steady, enthusiastic response. Some customers stood, some smiled widely, and a few even whispered words of admiration to each other. The young group, once the source of her anxiety, now joined in, their expressions open and sincere. The music had transformed the energy of the cafe, turning disbelief into recognition, doubt into admiration. She remained seated for a moment, letting the applause wash over her. Her hands rested gently on the keys, her heart racing not with fear but with exhilaration. She felt a deep sense of relief and pride, the culmination of years of practice, patience, and quiet courage. The piano had become more than an instrument. It had become a voice for her soul, a way to communicate what she could never put into words. And in that moment, she realized that she had not only captivated the audience, but had also liberated herself from the fear that had held her back. The cafe owner approached her with a warm smile, his eyes shining with genuine appreciation. "That was extraordinary," he said. "I didn't know you had this talent. You've got something special." She smiled shyly, a mixture of pride and relief filling her chest. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I've always loved playing, but I never thought anyone would really listen." Her coworker, standing nearby, gave her a small nod of approval. "See? I told you. You just needed the chance." The atmosphere in the cafe had shifted completely. Customers who had previously overlooked her now watched with newfound respect. The young group who had teased her moments ago were now silent, thoughtful, and quietly impressed. The regulars smiled, some shaking their heads in admiration, some tapping their fingers lightly to the rhythm they had just heard. It was a small transformation in the grand scheme of life, but for the waitress it felt monumental. She had stepped out of the shadows and revealed something real, something beautiful, and it had been received with warmth and appreciation. As she rose from the piano, the applause continued, filling the room with energy and positivity. She felt a sense of connection, a shared moment that was more than just entertainment. It was an expression of human emotion, a bridge between her quiet life and the people who had finally seen her for who she was. She realized that this experience was more than just a performance. It was a turning point, a moment when she could no longer remain unseen or unheard. Her fingers brushed the keys one last time before she stepped away, feeling a sense of completion and satisfaction. The cafe was alive with conversation again, but now the tone had changed. People spoke with curiosity and respect, sharing their impressions of the performance and exchanging looks of admiration. The young group, who had been the source of her doubts, now seemed reflective, perhaps reconsidering the assumptions they had made. The music had not only captivated them, it had prompted a shift in perception, a reminder that people often have hidden depths waiting to be discovered. As the day went on, she returned to her usual tasks, taking orders and serving drinks, but everything felt different. There was a lightness in her step, a quiet confidence that had not been there before. She caught glimpses of people watching her with a new understanding, and she realized that the world could not easily dismiss her anymore. She had made her mark, not with words or force, but with music and authenticity. The piano remained in the corner, a silent witness to the courage it had inspired and the hearts it had touched. And so, the third part of her story ended not with fanfare, but with transformation. The laughter that had greeted her earlier had been replaced by respect, doubt replaced by admiration. She had faced her fears, embraced her talent, and captivated an audience that had once overlooked her. It was a simple act, yet profound in its effect, marking the beginning of a journey where her voice, her true voice, would no longer be hidden. The cafe hummed with a gentle energy as the waitress continued to play, her fingers moving effortlessly across the keys. She had found a rhythm, a flow that carried her forward, and the music seemed to expand to fill every corner of the room. It was no longer just a performance. It was a conversation, an exchange of emotion between her and everyone who was listening. The laughter that had greeted her earlier had disappeared entirely, replaced by the focused attention of the audience, each person hanging on to every note, every subtle shift in melody. As she played, she began to notice small reactions from the crowd. The elderly man in the corner, who had always been a quiet presence in the cafe, now had tears glistening in his eyes. He had watched her move silently between tables countless times, and now he could see the depth and beauty she had carried with her all this time. The young couple who often whispered to each other were holding hands tightly, swaying gently with the music, their faces reflecting awe and appreciation. Even the group of students who had teased her were leaning forward, completely absorbed, their previous amusement replaced with respect and fascination. Her confidence grew with each passing minute. She allowed herself to play more expressively, letting the music take on nuances and flourishes she had never dared to use in public before. The notes carried her joy, her struggles, and the quiet strength she had nurtured over the years. Each chord seemed to resonate not just in the cafe but inside the hearts of those listening, creating a shared moment that connected everyone in the room. It was as if the music had created an invisible thread linking her to every person present, a silent understanding that needed no words. The cafe owner, who had been walking among the tables, stopped to watch more closely. His initial surprise had turned into admiration. He could see the dedication, the passion, and the talent she had hidden for so long. He had never imagined that the quiet waitress who moved calmly among the customers could produce something so powerful and moving. He stood quietly, letting the music wash over him, and realized that the cafe had been holding a hidden treasure all this time. She noticed the reactions of others around her, the subtle shifts in posture, the widening eyes, the moments when conversation paused to let the music speak. The young group, who had seemed so loud and confident, now looked thoughtful, their previous teasing replaced with wonder. One of them, who had whispered jokes moments before, now whispered in awe to their friend, unable to contain the appreciation. The shift in energy was palpable, and she felt a sense of pride that was both exhilarating and grounding. This was what it felt like to truly be seen. Her fingers danced across the keys, weaving a melody that was both intricate and accessible. She was telling a story, a tale of hidden talent, quiet resilience, and the courage to step forward despite fear. The music rose and fell, gentle at times, powerful at others, carrying the listeners along on an emotional journey they hadn't expected to take when they had entered the cafe. Some closed their eyes, letting the music carry them away, while others watched with rapt attention, mesmerized by the skill and emotion she poured into every note. As she continued, she allowed herself to experiment, to play passages she had never performed for anyone before. The cafe seemed to respond to her energy, the atmosphere alive with a quiet reverence. Each note was a declaration that she was more than just a waitress, more than the quiet observer in the background. She was someone with a story to tell, someone whose talent deserved to be recognized. And for the first time, she was confident that her story was being heard. The melody reached moments of complexity, weaving layers of sound that demanded attention and admiration. The audience, once distracted by their own conversations and distractions, was now fully engaged. The music had drawn them in, capturing their imagination and respect. The young couple leaned in toward each other, sharing quiet smiles, while the elderly man tapped his fingers lightly on the table, keeping rhythm with the music. Even the students, who had been mocking her earlier, now sat in complete silence, visibly moved by the performance. She paused briefly, allowing a soft chord to linger, giving the audience a moment to absorb what they had just heard. Then she continued, more confidently than ever, the music flowing through her as naturally as breathing. She felt free, unburdened, and fully present in the moment. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was an extension of herself, a voice that had been waiting for this chance to be heard. The room responded in kind, the audience leaning in, fully immersed, sharing in the beauty she was creating. Time seemed to blur as she played, each note building upon the last, creating a tapestry of sound that was both intricate and emotionally resonant. The cafe became a space where ordinary people were momentarily transported, connected by the shared experience of listening to something truly beautiful. She felt a deep satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment and joy that came from expressing herself so completely and having it received with warmth and admiration. As the final notes approached, she began to slow, letting the melody taper gently, allowing the music to settle in the room. The audience remained quiet, as if reluctant to let the moment end. She felt a swell of pride and relief, knowing that she had given them a gift from her heart, and that it had been received with genuine appreciation. The applause began softly at first, then grew steadily, filling the room with warmth and energy. Some customers stood, some clapped with enthusiasm, and a few whispered words of admiration and awe. The young group, who had teased her earlier, now joined in the applause, their faces open and sincere. Their previous laughter and amusement had transformed into respect and recognition. The regulars smiled broadly, some shaking their heads in disbelief at the talent they had overlooked for so long. The cafe owner approached once again, his expression full of admiration. "That was extraordinary," he said. "I had no idea you could play like that. You've got something truly special." She smiled, a mixture of humility and pride washing over her. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady but quiet. "I've always loved playing, but I never thought anyone would really listen." Her coworker, who had been watching closely, gave her a gentle nod. "You see, people just needed to hear it for themselves. You've always had this talent." The atmosphere in the cafe remained changed, the energy lighter, warmer, and more appreciative. People spoke to each other in tones filled with admiration, sharing their impressions of the performance. The young group, who had been dismissive and mocking, now seemed thoughtful, perhaps reconsidering the assumptions they had made about her. The applause continued, a sign that her music had not only captivated, but had transformed the room, leaving a lasting impression. As she returned to her usual tasks, taking orders and serving drinks, she carried with her a sense of accomplishment and confidence that she had never experienced before. She caught glimpses of customers watching her with newfound respect, and she realized that this performance had shifted something fundamental. She was no longer invisible, no longer just a quiet presence moving among the tables. She had stepped into her own light, revealing a hidden depth that others had not seen until now. By the end of the afternoon, the cafe had settled into a comfortable rhythm again. The sunlight softened as it streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the room. She wiped down the last tables, a quiet smile on her face, reflecting on what had just happened. The music had been more than a performance. It had been a declaration, a revelation, and a moment of courage. She had faced her fear and shared her gift, and in doing so, she had changed the way people saw her. The piano remained in the corner, a silent witness to the moment that had transformed the cafe and herself. She knew that this was just the beginning, that her journey with music had only just begun. The experience had shown her the power of courage, of embracing her talent, and of allowing others to see her true self. And while the day would continue with orders, drinks, and customers, she carried a new spark within her, a quiet confidence that could never be taken away. The applause and admiration lingered in her mind long after the cafe had returned to its normal pace. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that her voice, through music, could reach others, could inspire, and could connect. The transformation was subtle but profound, both for herself and for those who had witnessed it. She had taken a chance, embraced her fear, and created a moment that would not be forgotten. And with that, she realized that sometimes, one small act of courage could change everything. The afternoon light slowly softened into evening as the cafe settled back into its usual rhythm. The chatter of customers returned, but it carried a different tone now, filled with curiosity and warmth. The waitress moved through the tables with a quiet pride, her steps lighter, her movements more confident. She noticed the small smiles, the lingering glances, and the subtle nods of acknowledgement from people who had witnessed her performance. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly seen, and it was a feeling that left her both humbled and exhilarated. The piano remained in the corner, its keys still warm from her touch, a silent witness to the transformation that had taken place. She walked past it occasionally, brushing her fingers over the smooth wood, a small smile playing on her lips. The music she had shared had not only captivated the audience but had also changed something within herself. She realized that she no longer needed the approval of others to feel validated. She had faced her fear, embraced her talent, and found a voice that could reach others in ways words never could. Customers who had once overlooked her now approached with genuine interest, complimenting her on the performance. The elderly man, who had been a quiet presence for years, stopped by her station and said, "I didn't know you could play like that. It was beautiful. Thank you for sharing it with us." She smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I've loved playing for a long time, but I've never played in front of anyone like this before." Even the young group who had teased her earlier approached her with hesitant smiles, their eyes reflecting newfound respect. We didn't expect that," one of them said. "It was really amazing." She nodded graciously, her cheeks warming slightly. "I'm glad you liked it," she said, her voice steady but gentle. She realized that their reaction was not just about her talent, but about the courage it took to share it. It reminded her that people often judge based on what they see on the surface, never realizing the depth hidden beneath. Her coworker came over, offering a proud smile. "I told you," she whispered. "People just needed to see it for themselves. You've always had this gift." The waitress felt a rush of gratitude, knowing that someone had believed in her when she had doubted herself. It was a reminder that encouragement and support could make all the difference, that sometimes all it took was a single person to believe in you to give you the courage to take a step forward. As the evening wore on, she returned to her duties, but the energy around her had shifted. The cafe felt warmer, more connected. Conversations carried a sense of shared experience, and the smiles from customers were tinged with recognition and appreciation. She felt a quiet joy in knowing that she had left a lasting impression, not through grand gestures or loud announcements, but through something deeply personal and authentic. Her music had touched hearts, and that was a gift she would carry with her forever. Later, as the cafe began to close for the night, she found a moment to sit at the piano again. This time, there was no audience, no pressure, just her and the instrument she had always loved. She played softly, letting the music flow naturally, exploring melodies she had never dared to try in public. The notes filled the empty cafe, echoing off the walls and creating a sense of peace and fulfillment. It was a private celebration of her courage, a quiet acknowledgement of how far she had come. The cafe owner approached, leaning against the doorway with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "that performance today, it changed the atmosphere of this place. People will remember it for a long time, and I think you'll find opportunities coming your way if you want them." She looked up at him, surprised but grateful. "Opportunities?" she asked softly. He nodded. "There's a lot of potential in what you can do. You've touched people today, and that kind of talent doesn't go unnoticed." She felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The thought of stepping further into the world of music was both thrilling and intimidating. But she realized that she had already taken the hardest step. She had faced her fear and shared her talent. Everything else would follow, one note at a time, one experience at a time. The courage she had found today would guide her, and the support she had felt would remind her that she was not alone. As she closed the cafe for the night, she walked past the piano one last time, her fingers brushing the keys lightly. She felt a sense of closure and anticipation all at once. The journey she had begun that morning, timid and uncertain, had led her to a place of recognition, respect, and self-discovery. She had transformed not only the way others saw her but also the way she saw herself. The music had been a bridge, connecting her inner world with the world around her, and she knew that it would continue to guide her in the days to come. Walking home under the evening sky, she reflected on the events of the day. The laughter, the doubts, the teasing. They had all been part of the journey, challenges that had tested her courage and determination. And yet, they had also highlighted the power of authenticity, of embracing one's true self and sharing it with the world. She realized that her story was not just about a performance at a cafe. It was about finding the strength to be seen, to be heard, and to believe in the value of her own voice. That night, as she lay in bed, she could still hear the echoes of the piano, the warmth of the applause, and the expressions of surprise and admiration from the customers. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had made a difference, even in a small space, in a few moments of time. It was a reminder that courage and talent, when combined, could create something unforgettable, something that touched lives in ways nothing else could. In the days that followed, the cafe continued as usual, but the memory of her performance lingered. Customers spoke of it to friends, sharing their astonishment and admiration. Some requested that she play again, while others simply watched with newfound appreciation as she moved through the cafe with quiet confidence. She noticed the change in how people treated her, the respect that had replaced doubt, and she felt a sense of peace and pride that came from knowing she had earned it through authenticity and courage. Her life continued, blending the familiar routines of work with the growing awareness of her talent and its impact. She found herself more willing to take risks, to embrace new opportunities, and to share her music with those who were willing to listen. The piano, once a private refuge, became a symbol of her courage, a reminder that stepping into the light and trusting herself could lead to experiences that were both transformative and deeply rewarding. Looking back on that day, she realized that it had been a turning point, a moment that had changed everything. The laughter that had greeted her initially had been transformed into admiration, doubt into respect, and fear into courage. She had faced the unknown, trusted her abilities, and allowed her true self to shine. And in doing so, she had not only captivated an audience but had also discovered a new sense of purpose, confidence, and self-worth. The piano remained in the corner of the cafe, silent yet full of potential, waiting for the next time she would sit and let her music flow. It was a symbol of what could happen when talent met courage, a reminder that one small act of bravery could create ripples far beyond what she could imagine. And as she moved through her life, she carried with her the memory of that day, the feeling of being truly seen, and the knowledge that she had the power to touch hearts, inspire others, and embrace her own path with confidence. In the end, the story was not just about a performance. It was about transformation, discovery, and the enduring power of authenticity. It was about a quiet person stepping into her own light, revealing a hidden talent, and capturing the hearts of those around her. And it was a reminder that courage, when combined with passion, could change not only how others saw you but how you saw yourself, opening doors to a future filled with possibility, hope, and the promise of more music to come.